1989, the year when one of the most brutal rivalries in Formula One erupted. Do you remember the most notorious defeat of two-time champion Alain Prost? Last year, a young Ayrton Senna overtook him in the same car. It was a real shame for Prost. The team saw Senna as the future, but Alain wanted revenge. And believe me, he was definitely not ready to lose again to his daring teammate. As a result, 1989 ended with one of the most controversial finales in Formula One history.
Oh my goodness, this is fantastic!
So, who would win? The 1989 season began in Brazil, Senna's homeland. For the first time, Ayrton competed as the current world champion. But even with this status, he had never won a home race. This win would not only be historic for him, but would also allow him to start gaining a psychological advantage over Prost. For Alain, it was a chance to break Senna's confidence by beating him in front of his home crowd. However, both drivers faced new challenges. McLaren no longer had the dominant lead he had in 1988. Turbo engines were banned, and the team moved to Honda's powerful V10s. Senna took the pole position, but Prost started only from 5th place. It seemed that McLaren's advantage had faded. These hopes were dashed when Ayrton made a poor start and found himself between Berger and Patrese.
Three abreast, it must end in trouble, and it does. Patrese gets away.
At the first corner, he broke his front wing and was forced to forget about the win. The Brazilian was once again failing to fulfill his dream in front of his home crowd. For Prost, it was great news. After the first turn, he was already 4th. The Williams drivers remained the leaders of the race, but his main target was Nigel Mansell. Prost and Mansell passed Williams with focus, but Alain failed to fight for the victory. He finished 2nd, while Ayrton finished the race in 11th place. Despite the McLaren win, there is a rising tension between Honda and Prost. They did their best to keep a friendly attitude in front of the fans, but in 1989, things changed quickly and got much worse. And at the same time, the tension between Prost and Senna was also rising. At the start of the San Marino GP, Senna and Prost made an agreement. While both were starting on the first row, they decided that the driver with the best start would lead the race unchallenged and take the victory. So, Senna got a great start and took the lead, while Prost just stayed behind and didn't try to pass. But on lap 4,
Tamburello and Berger goes straight off into the barrier. A big accident this at 180 miles an hour, shedding bits of car, and it bursts into flame. There's a full fuel load.
The red flag was waved, and the race had to be restarted. Now this time, Prost had a better start, and he expected Senna to keep his word. But to his surprise, the Brazilian attacked and passed him, breaking their promise. From there, Senna went on to win the race. Prost was furious. He accused Senna of breaking their agreement, but Senna argued, saying that it was a restart and not the original start of the race.
Whole story. I was very angry because we had an agreement with Ayrton. We had this kind of agreement very often with Nicky and KK and a lot of drivers in the team. And we had also this kind of agreement many times last year, saying that the one we would take the best start won't be attacked by the teammate before the first corner. And we arranged something that, the one leading could stay on the right and take the best line. And I was very upset because Ayrton overtook me, and I could not believe, I was on the right side and I could not believe, and I think it...
Prost expressed his frustration publicly to get more attention on the incident. However, Senna found this offensive, and from that point on, they stopped talking to each other. But the team boss, Ron Dennis, tried to stay out of it by saying he didn't know about the deal. Behind closed doors, the teammates went to the higher-ups to talk about the situation. Ron asked, "Is it true that you had an agreement?" Ayrton replied, "Yes." Then Ron asked, why didn't you keep it?" Ayrton responded, "It wasn't me, it was Alain who changed the deal." Senna was angry that Prost had spoken publicly about the incident. Because of this, he ended the friendship or connection that could have been between Alain and him. The atmosphere between Ayrton and Alain in Monaco was unbearable. For Senna, Prost no longer existed, and he did not believe his excuses about the journalist's guilt. Despite the tension in the team, the Brazilian remained steadfast. He was so fast in qualifying that he was 2 seconds ahead of Prost and set his best time 1.6 seconds faster than the year before. However, things didn't go so smoothly in the race. Senna encountered a gearbox problem. He couldn't use first gear, and things got even worse when Ayrton lost second gear. I could get by without first, but losing second was a big problem. I had to change my driving style so Alain wouldn't notice I was in trouble, he said. Senna used all his skills to stay in the lead, and that day he showed how good he really is by winning his second Monaco Grand Prix. After this result, he could safely be called the King of Monaco. Monaco didn't make their relationship any better, but it didn't get worse either. However, things were about to change at the Mexican Grand Prix. Prost lost the pole position to Senna again in qualifying, but the professor had a secret weapon, a plan built around a pit stop strategy. So, what's the point? Ayrton chose the medium tires for the start, while Prost went for the softs to be able to attack him from the start. At the start of the race, Prost took advantage of his soft tires and started to put pressure on his teammate, trying to make him make a mistake. But Senna was driving perfectly. In fact, his laps were getting faster, even though he was on medium tires, which should have been slower. Prost began to doubt whether the two cars really had the same engines. The Frenchman's frustration grew as Senna increased his lead to 4 seconds on lap 14. Things got even worse for Alain when the team put the wrong tires on his car during the pit stop. This forced him to enter the pits for the second time, ruining his chances of winning. Senna finished first, leaving Prost behind. All the mistakes on the pit stops and the difference in speed, even at the start of the race, made Prost believe that Honda preferred Senna to him. This made sense because Senna was very close to Honda from his days at Lotus. Also, no one remembers that there were controversies between Prost and Honda as early as the '88 season. Imagine if we could go back to '88 and find out the truth. Alain claimed that the engineers preferred Ayrton because the Brazilian was more of a samurai, and he was a computer. The conflict went so far that even FISA director Balestre publicly appealed to Honda to give both drivers equal engines. According to Prost, at the end of the season, he had a meeting with the company's chairman, Nobuhiko Kawamoto. He admitted that Honda was more for Ayrton than Alain. But Kawamoto promised Prost that the machines would be the same next season. So Prost was furious as hell after the race in Mexico because of the broken promise. So he openly said that Senna had received a better engine. Immediately after that, rumors started flying that he wanted to leave McLaren next season. Ron Dennis quickly responded, explaining that both drivers had chosen engine numbers out of a hat. Senna did not respond to the media, as it was another provocation for him. At the time, he was leading the World Championship by 7 points ahead of Prost. The next 4 Grand Prix were a nightmare for Senna. At the US Grand Prix, Ayrton was forced to retire on lap 44 due to electrical problems, although he was confidently leading the race. This gave Prost a direct way to win. Honda immediately took the chance to publicly declare that they had never prioritized Senna in any form. Even after that, however, Prost remained steadfast in his suspicions. At the next Grand Prix in Canada, Senna suffered another setback when his engine failed 3 laps before the finish line. But Prost was also unlucky, and Ayrton still had a chance in the championship. Before his home Grand Prix in France, Alain made an unexpected statement that only increased the tension between his teammates.
I've decided, and after very long discussion with Ron and Mansour and the sponsors, that I'm not going to drive for McLaren next year. It is very important to say today that I had 6 years fantastic on the racing point of view, on the human point of view too. So that's why we organize this press conference today. We want to live, I mean, in a very good manner, so with a lot of dignity. There will never be a problem between McLaren and Alain Prost.
For Senna, it became a personal case. That's why all Senna wanted was to defeat the Frenchman on his home soil. However, his differential wanted something else. It failed after the restart, and the Brazilian went off the course again. Prost got his second home victory for his adoring fans. Despite the fact that Alain held a diplomatic press conference announcing his departure from the team, everyone knew that he was leaving because of Senna. Therefore, Prost's departure only escalated their rivalry. Ayrton, who had become the team's main driver, was determined to prove that Prost was the problem, not him. However, at the British Grand Prix, he suffered the same failures. Another spin and no points once again. Guess who won? Senna's black streak allowed Prost to seize the championship lead by 20 points. But thanks to an unusual scoring system, the Brazilian still had a real chance to get back into the fight. What is this system? This is a different story, and I'll tell you about it a bit later. The German Grand Prix was the chosen new place for the rivalry's comeback. Senna needed a win after 4 retirements, and Prost wanted a new victory so that Ayrton would not have a chance at all. The McLaren drivers had a strong qualifying session and took first and second place, but the question on everyone's mind was, could Ayrton finally end his losing streak? As soon as the lights went out, they lost the lead to Gerhard Berger in a Ferrari. Prost and Senna were lucky enough to have the best cars on the grid, so by the end of the next lap, they were fighting against each other for the win. Lap after lap, Alain chased Ayrton, keeping a gap of less than a second. The professor knew that to win, he would have to think beyond the box, because they had identical cars. On the 17th lap, Prost pitted to change the tires and try to undercut the Brazilian, but his stop was slow, which caused him to lose a lot of time. However, Ayrton's stop was even worse, allowing Prost to pull away with a 4-second lead. Despite the slow stop, Senna did not give up and was determined to break his losing streak. Moreover, Senna had to win to stay in the championship fight. When Prost was leading the race, his gearbox failed, just like his teammate in the previous races. Senna took the win.
Accelerating down towards the checkered flag and victory in the German Grand Prix. In second place, Alain Prost, disappointed.
At the very next Grand Prix in Hungary, Senna finished second and Prost finished fourth. And in the next race in Belgium, Senna won. There was an interesting moment on the podium when Jean-Marie Balestre raised Prost's and Mansell's hands, while Senna, the actual winner, was left forgotten. Short reminder, Balestre was French, and they were close with Prost. But Senna paid no mind to this and closed the gap. Although there were still 5 races left, none of them were going to retreat. There was also still uncertainty. Prost did not announce his new team after the French Grand Prix, but everything was to change at the Italian Grand Prix. In qualifying, Senna was a shocking 1.8 seconds faster than the Frenchman. I always said Ayrton was very difficult to beat in qualifying. He had a way of setting up the car and working with the qualifying tires that I could not do, but I could not accept that I was that much slower. It was obvious that I was completely out of the system. Prost continued to demand explanations from Honda engineers, even after the problems Senna had after the French Grand Prix. They tried to show me on the telemetry that since Ayrton was going quicker than me through the corners, that's why he was 12 to 14 kph faster than me on the straight. Prost rejected the explanation and asked a well-thought-out question. In France, Senna never beat me in qualifying, so maybe you have an explanation for that. Prost was so angry that he accused Honda of providing Ayrton with a more powerful engine. Honda responded by explaining that the difference was in the Brazilian's driving style. According to them, Senna's throttle control technique allowed him to keep the engine's speed in higher ranges. However, Honda not only denied the accusations, but also hinted that the problem might be with Prost. They suggested that his driving style did not fully meet the requirements of their engine. Unhappy with his chassis and engine, Prost looked devastated in qualifying, as he was behind the two Ferraris. While waiting for the race, things escalated even further, as the other drivers started getting involved. 5 clicks faster on the straight, said Mansell, looking at the relative times for the two McLaren drivers, and pointing to Senna's 321 km/h top speed. It's obvious they're up to their tricks again. Ayrton was leading the race and on his way to victory with a 22-second lead over Prost. But in the final laps, Senna's engine blew up.
Senna, his engine blew, pumped out oil onto the back tyre. Ayrton spun, the crowd once again cheered their delight. Alain Prost in first place, heading for victory number 39.
Giving the win to Alain. The Tifosi celebrated this win like no other, not only because of the rivalry, but especially because of Prost's victory. 6 years ago, the Frenchman was the most hated driver in Italy. During the Italian GP, he had to hire bodyguards because he was pelted with stones by Ferrari's loyal supporters. But this time around, things were different because Alain announced that he will be driving for the Italian team in the next season. On the podium, Prost was greeted with as much enthusiasm as if he had been driving a Ferrari. The whole crowd was chanting, "Go pa, go pa," urging Alain to throw the cup. As thousands cheered and screamed his name, Prost tossed the trophy he had just won into the sea of people below. But pay attention to a small detail. Ron Dennis, the head of McLaren, was in a state of complete disbelief. He was obsessed with every cup for the team. It was a blow right in the heart. But there's a catch. Ron was so furious that in a fit of anger, he threw the Constructors' Trophy at Alain Prost right under his feet. That was just the beginning. A surprise awaited the Frenchman in the boxes, which could change the course of the championship. Going back to the garage, Prost was met with an unpleasant surprise. A Ferrari sticker had been stuck to his helmet, and a plate of pasta with a bottle of Italian wine had been placed in his car. To his team, it seemed like Prost was already preparing to join Ferrari, and by tossing the cup, he had thrown away all the hard work his team had put in. Prost knew the mechanic's sense of humor was now mixed with bitterness. He felt like the team and Honda were fully supporting Senna. Prost's words caused a wave of outrage, especially from Honda. The company issued an ultimatum to McLaren. If Prost did not apologize, they would stop supplying engines to it. Team boss Ron Dennis spent the whole day calling the numbers he had for Alain. Jean-Marie Balestre escalated the situation even more. On a radio broadcast, he said, "I was furious. Until recent months, we have had a fantastic battle between Prost and Senna. It's clear if Senna's car shows its superiority in the next 4 Grand Prix, considerable damage would be done to the value of the World Championship." This was the last straw for Honda. Pressure from all sides forced Prost to openly apologize to Honda. However, in the next qualifying in Portugal, the results were not very successful for the French driver. Alain faced tire pressure problems and finished only 4th, while Ayrton took 2nd place. To everyone's surprise, the Ferrari team had a great car for that race. Berger, who qualified for pole, was leading the race by a large margin, and Nige overtook Senna easily for 2nd place.
Can go for it here. He's out from behind. Pit, he's going through. Nigel Mansell up into second place. Ferrari first and second.
The Ferrari's pace was so dominant that Senna's only hope was to outsmart the Italian team during the pit stops. Meanwhile, the Professor was holding onto his fourth position, waiting for the right opportunity to strike. Senna went in for a tire change, but the team was very slow, costing him precious time. On the other hand, Mansell's pit stop was a real disaster. He missed his pit box and was forced to reverse. However, this was illegal under the regulations, meaning Mansell would be disqualified from the Grand Prix. While leaving the pit, Mansell was focused on Senna and didn't even see the black flag, which meant that he had to retire the car as he was disqualified. On lap 49, Mansell tried to overtake Senna, but the Brazilian defended his position and left no space. This caused them to make contact, ending both of their races in the gravel. Let's pause for a second here. Mansell got a black flag, but he didn't see it because he was focused on chasing Senna, right? Okay, let's assume that's the case. Now the real question is, why did Senna even fight him? The illegal maneuver happened right in front of the McLaren team, so everyone in the pit knew that the Ferrari driver was going to be disqualified. They could have informed Senna to avoid fighting with a disqualified driver, but they didn't, and that cost him the race, possibly the championship. Meanwhile, the Professor was calmly watching all of this unfold as he cruised towards another win over Senna. Although Senna fell far behind Prost in the individual standings, he did not stop fighting. Ayrton was determined to win. He proved it in a dominant style win at the Spanish Grand Prix. After this race, Prost would have 108 points, and Senna would have 81. You may ask why would have. The fact is that the rule of the 11 best races was in effect, which left Prost with 90 points and Senna with 81. I know it's confusing, so let me explain. Until 1991, drivers were only awarded the best results from a limited number of races. There were 16 stages that season, but only the best 11 were counted. Now focus, Prost had already exhausted his attempts at the maximum result. This meant that any additional wins would not change his final score. Instead, if Ayrton wins the next two races, he will become the champion. Got it? Great. Next on the calendar was the Japanese GP, and this time Prost had the chance to end the season with his third championship, as he was just a few points away from securing the title. But things didn't go as planned. In qualifying, Senna dominated and took pole position by an impressive 1.7 seconds. The MP45 was a dominating car, so Prost knew that the only thing standing between him and the title was his teammate. The other drivers didn't stand a chance against his McLaren, making the race against Senna the real challenge for the championship. Minutes before the start, the Professor made some changes to the car by reducing the downforce. It turned out to be a great call, as Prost had a better pace than Senna during the race. On Sunday, if Prost finishes ahead of Senna, he would secure his third championship. But if Senna wins, there would be one last race to decide the world champion. Now, the Brazilian had to chase down his teammate and try to take back the lead. The Frenchman quickly built a gap over his teammate, and by lap 11, he was 4.9 seconds ahead of Senna and out of sight. Prost was much faster in the early laps of the race, and in fact, his pace was so strong that even the pit stops didn't affect the time difference. However, little by little, lap by lap, Senna started to close the gap, and by the 37th lap, it was down to just 1.7 seconds. Prost, determined to secure his third title, pushed hard to extend the gap back to 2.9 seconds. But then, Senna launched a series of fast laps, closing in once more. Prost kept the gap constant at 1 second until lap 43, but then it started to shrink again. By lap 45, Prost found himself having to compromise his line. taking it tight, preventing Senna from overtaking him. The entire Suzuka crowd, along with the McLaren team, watched the intense battle unfold. This race was probably going to decide the 1989 Drivers' Championship. Prost was doing everything he could to keep that lead. The tension was only rising, and neither of the drivers wanted to give up. To overtake Prost, Senna had to think out of the box, and as you know, he was extremely good at it. Ayrton was studying Prost's racing line into every corner lap by lap, and planned a surprise for him. And on lap 47, Senna finally saw an opportunity. And the inevitable happened. Senna dived into the Casio Triangle chicane.
This is fantastic! They meet! This is what we want!
Prost didn't even expect him to launch from that far behind. As a result, he closed the door for Senna and they crashed. Share your thoughts on who was at fault in the crash in the comments. Both cars seemed to be out of the race. Prost got out of the car believing the title was safely in his hands, but Senna asked the stewards to help push his car back onto the track. With the car running again, he was able to continue the race, hoping to still have a chance at the championship. However, his front wing was damaged, and after a whole lap, the wing finally came off, forcing Senna to pit. Meanwhile, Alessandro Nannini from Benetton moved into first place. Senna was determined to get his lead back and keep fighting for the title. He quickly caught up to Nannini and passed him at the same spot where he had collided with Prost. Senna finished the race in first place, keeping his championship hopes alive until the last race of the season. Or so he thought at the time. While Senna was asking for help to return into the race, Prost ran to the stewards.
Pushed by the marshals and start again. And obviously I was not that happy, and that's it. I went into the garage. I had a very strong argument with Ron, and that's it, you know. And yeah, no, I did not remember.
Went to the tower first or to the garage first?
Garage, or no?
I believe you went to the tower first.
Maybe to the tower. Yeah.
Maybe you had the argument with Ron in the tower.
In the tower, yeah, because one was already in the tower, and we had a strong argument there. But in no situation, I was, for example, in the tower with Mr. Balestre alone, for example. That did not happen. I read that many times. We had the argument. I even did not enter into the race control.
But were Senna's actions while restarting the race legal? The judge's decision was postponed for a long time. Rumors began to circulate around the paddock that Ayrton might be disqualified. Eventually, these rumors were confirmed. FISA disqualified Senna. They claimed that he had cut the chicane when he was returning to the track after the accident with Prost, which meant that he had not finished the full distance of the race.
To be very honest, you know, I was absolutely sure that I'm going to win the race or an accident like this, because I knew that he wanted to win absolutely. And you know, the problem with Ayrton, he can't accept that. He can't accept not to win, and he can't accept that somebody resists by an overtaking maneuver. And a lot of times, if you remember last year and this year, I opened the door. And if I did not open the door, we would have crashed like this. And I said before the race, if that happened, I don't open the door anymore. You know, and that happened.
Ayrton could not believe it. He considered this decision to be very political and accused Balestre of favoring Prost as his compatriot. Let's briefly analyze this incident. From the driver's perspective, Senna's move was risky, but it wasn't impossible. Prost left the door open and then turned into Senna when they were alongside. With that, he automatically penalized himself by retiring from the race. What about Senna? While the marshals were trying to push both McLarens from a dangerous place, Senna restarted his engine and went on. Technically, the marshals were allowed to push the car to a safer place if it was in a dangerous part of the track, and according to the rules, this would not be considered as the outside influence to help restart the car, which is illegal. The stewards disqualified him for cutting the chicane and not completing the full distance of the race, despite Senna being stationary for way longer than any advantage being possibly gained by cutting the chicane. McLaren tried to appeal the decision, but made it even worse. Jean-Marie Balestre, the director of FISA, supported Senna's disqualification and said,
On n'avait pas le droit non plus d'avoir un accrochage stupide.
In addition to the disqualification, Ayrton was further punished.
Non seulement une suspension avec sursis de licence, ce qui est un avertissement non seulement pour Ayrton Senna mais pour tous les pilotes, mais a prononcé également une aggravation de la peine.
Senna couldn't take it. He wanted to leave Formula One.
It's like I have total responsibility for everything that took place there. I was blamed for everything and I was penalized for everything. I was treated like a criminal. And this is totally unacceptable.
Senna and McLaren still planned to appeal the decision from Japan after the Australian Grand Prix, so they needed to take the last race seriously because it was important for their case. On race day, it was raining heavily, making the track unsafe. Senna considered the conditions too dangerous to race, but he did his best. Unfortunately, he was right, as he crashed and had to retire from the race.
Senna coming crashing into the back of Martin Brundle's car. A remarkable accident, it's ripped.
This ruined their appeal, because even if Senna had won in Japan, he still would have lost the championship. The year 1989 ended with one of the most controversial finales in Formula One history. Senna was not allowed to compete for the title in 1989 because of a rule that had never been used this way before. Ayrton accused Balestre of being corrupt and helping out his fellow countrymen. This was not Ayrton's first conflict with the FIA. In 1994, new rules made his car uncontrollable. Also, the rookie Michael Schumacher was constantly pressuring him, which led to a fatal mistake. But what happened there? Click on the video and find out what Senna's last season looked like.